Hey folks, welcome to the video lecture concerning the Civil War and the aftermath called Reconstruction. I'm just going to take a moment to fight that Civil War and know just a couple things about it. One thing is the Emancipation Proclamation. There's a lot of misunderstanding about the Emancipation Proclamation, so we want to kind of delve into that. The Civil War started in 1860 and it ended in 1865. So this is a 5-year battle that's going to cost 800,000 American lives. And many people still have the misconception that this was fought to end slavery. Well, if you look at the Emancipation Proclamation, which you were taught in 8th grade, freed the slaves, that wasn't issued until 1863. So if Lincoln was really interested in freeing the slaves, what's he waiting for? 3 years later. So there's two things we want you to know about the Emancipation. One thing is that it did not free all the slaves. Certain states called border states, which were slave states that were forcibly held in the Union, those slaves in those states, like Kentucky, they were not freed. The Emancipation Proclamation only freed slaves in rebelling territories. So the second concept has a lot to do with executive power. And we say that during times of crisis, civil rights become limited. That's a thesis statement. We're going to find this is true in World War II with Japanese Americans, with Arab Americans after 9/11, and with rebel citizens during the Civil War. So there's a Latin term in the Constitution called habeas corpus. And habeas corpus means show me the body. And it's your most basic civil liberties that are embedded in the original text of the Constitution. Not the Bill of Rights, that comes later, but this idea that if you're arrested, you should know why. That there should be some type of due process, some type of system, so there's checks and balances and you're not just arrested for no reason. Well, habeas corpus has been suspended a couple times in American history. One of those times was during the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln suspended habeas corpus in order to arrest and throw in jail anybody suspected of being a rebel in the border states. This kept those border states in the Union. So two major ideas so far about the Civil War. One of them has to do with habeas corpus and civil liberties. Watch your rights go down and the president's rights get expanded. And the second idea is the Emancipation Proclamation, about how it did not free all the slaves, but rather it freed only slaves in rebelling territories. So then the question becomes with emancipation, well, why do it at all? And the answer is simple. In 1863, foreign powers in Europe who were watching this football game quite closely are really rooting for the South. Remember, we left Great Britain, we fought the Revolutionary War, there's no love lost between us and Great Britain. So you can almost see Great Britain on the sidelines going, go rebels, go rebels. So that's worrisome to Lincoln. If the rebels, if the Confederacy gain access to new materials and generals and money, this is going to get nifty-fifty. So what we need to do is we need to turn this war rather about tariffs and sectionalism and money and expansion of slavery, make it about slavery. Free the slaves. And then England, France, and countries who are watching on the sideline, they're not going to jump in on the side of the slave states. They're not going to jump in to defend slavery. So that's going to keep them out of the war. In the long run, the North is going to win because of Mo. More resources, more men, more money, more population. The South, I'm sure, had the intent. I'm sure that they had the will, they had the drive, but in the long run, at the end of the day, the North is going to outlast the South. So now let's go to the next section. This might deserve its own video lecture, but we're going to sneak it in, which is Reconstruction. So let's take Reconstruction slowly. Reconstruction is the idea that after the Civil War, something needs to be done in order to build the South up, in order to have a process to get the South to come back to the country. I call this the hug and slug thesis. There are two basic sides in Reconstruction. There's the president's side, and we have two presidents, Abraham Lincoln, who was then assassinated, and a Southerner, Andrew Johnson from Tennessee. Both of these presidents want to hug the South. They want to hug the South because they never see that the South left in the first place. In their minds, the Union is unbreakable. So therefore, there's no need to punish the South in order to have them come back in the Union. Think of it this way. If Lincoln and I guess Johnson are fighting this Civil War to save the Union, to save the marriage, to get the wife to come back home to the husband, to the federal government. Once she decides to come back home, there's no need to punish her. You just open your arms and you give her a big hug and you kiss and make up and move on. Of course, freedmen, ex-slaves are not going to win in this equation. And again, this illustrates the point that Lincoln, and especially Andrew Johnson, they're not in it to help African Americans. They're in it to save the Union. There is a group that is looking out for African Americans, maybe not for the right reasons, maybe for political power, but the radical Republicans in Congress, they're not about to let the South get away with what they've done. They're not about to let the South come back in the Union, squash black rights, and have this Civil War fought for nothing. So radical Republicans propose their own Reconstruction. They compose a Reconstruction that is more of a slug Reconstruction, a punishing Reconstruction. Now, Lincoln's plan and Johnson's plan required only a 10% loyalty oath. That means 1 out of 10 Southerners had to say, I'm sorry. 1 out of 10. And then they get to come back in the Union. And the 13th Amendment to abolish slavery. And that's all, folks. That's all. Let me sneak in, they wanted the Freedmen's Bureau. But at the end of the day, there's nothing to protect African American rights. So, in response, the radical Republicans pushed through their own Reconstruction. 13th Amendment, abolish slavery. 14th Amendment, my favorite amendment. We'll go over that in a second. And 15th Amendment, which is black male vote. Let's do 14th Amendment and show why that 14th Amendment was the most punishing of amendments for the South. And it was a requirement for them to come back to the Union. Not only did the 14th Amendment guarantee citizenship for African Americans, and giving them all the rights and privileges of all other Americans, but it had what's called the Equal Protection Clause. It's on my fridge. It's in my bedroom. I love it. Listen to the words carefully, and I'm going to summarize them. No state shall deny its citizens equal protection under the law. Now, I'm just going to go over here and grab my friend, the Bill of Rights. And here's the idea, folks. The Bill of Rights protects you from the federal government, from daddy. What the 14th Amendment does is it says no state, Mississippi, shall deny its citizens, freed blacks, from equal protection under the law. The 14th Amendment is really taking this off the wall, off the federal wall, and it's bringing it down to the states eventually. So, 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment, 50% loyalty oath, the Freedmen's Bureau, to have a school for African Americans to learn to read and write, get back on their feet. These are the main features of the slug Reconstruction Plan, or the radical Reconstruction Plan. African Americans did prosper for a small amount of time during Reconstruction. Not all African Americans, but the last part of the plan was the plan that guaranteed that blacks would be able to vote and blacks would be able to participate for just a little bit while. I'm sure that they thought it would be longer than that, but it is military occupation. Leave the troops in the South. Right after when Reconstruction started, Southern governments immediately started passing laws called black codes to deny blacks' rights. But because the military was there, and because radical Republicans passed contrary laws, Jim Crow wasn't allowed to rise up. The Klan was declared a terrorist organization. African Americans were elected to state governments. Two African Americans were elected to the United States Senate. Maybe it's one. The idea being that blacks participated. They were Republicans. Radical Republicans protected their rights with military occupation and the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Reconstruction ends with the Compromise of 1877. In 1876, an election was held where the Republican of the North, his name was Rutherford B. Hayes, was running against a Southern Democrat. Remember, Democrats in the South are white. And it was a tie. It was an electoral deadlock. And as part of this compromise and part of this idea that in this election, the Northerner, the Republican Hayes, won, the South in return was given something. They were given their independence back. Independence for white Southerners. And the military was asked to leave the South as part of the Compromise of 1877. The state in question was Florida and their electoral votes. So the deal was, hey, Hayes, you can have Florida. You can have the presidency. You can have the electoral win. Take the troops back home when you go. And as soon as the troops go north, the white troops come out in the South. And I don't mean white people. I mean white people under white hoods. I mean the Klan. And the rise of Jim Crow will radically ascend. And that'll be the end of black rights for another 75 years in the South.